measuring post and retention. You can also start to look at emotions, learning emotions, and I think this could be applied to a variety of studies. And there are some questionnaires, these environment questionnaires, or I do have some questionnaires that have been tested in many situations, and they are quite valid and easy to apply, and they are, in at least German and English, very easy wording for pupils. Just ask them, was it boring for you? Then children know what you mean about this. And in the second step is one part what we did is a meta-analysis and combined it with some kind of a control study. One important aspect, at least in Germany, is the topic about living animals in the classroom, in biology teaching. Living animal does not mean dangerous animals or so, but to look at animals and how they behave, make notes about animals, and it is considered, again, going back to Comenius, it's considered to be very productive for teaching using these living animals. And one of my PhD students, Eberhard, made his PhD about this topic. And we first started with some kind of meta-analysis. This is a technique where you try to locate all applications in usually English language or in other languages that you understand. Of course, it's difficult to locate studies in languages that you don't understand. And then you look at all these studies and try to make some condense to find out which is effective and which is not. And this is also a measure that is used in medicine. To test, for example, for hypertension, check out what is effective in treating hypertension. And you can also use this technique in education. Yes, you see, and in medicine it was the Cochrane reviews. They very thoroughly go through the literature and assess all the other studies, and of course John Hattie from New Zealand, but he has become very popular in Germany in the last 2-3 years, and I was very amused about that, because Hattie has published in 1987 a big meta-analysis, and some of his basic ideas are the same. So if the Germans had read his analysis 20 years earlier, they would not have been so surprised. Of course, he had added studies, more studies, so it has become better and better, his main arguments, but he started early in the 1980s to do this kind of work. And I think that it's always good to look at such studies to learn for your own one. Such meta-analytic procedures are very strict. They have a given protocol, and you have to document all steps in an article or in a dissertation or in a master thesis. And it's very important because you must be as objective as possible to avoid any bias. Some people, for example, they read only studies that confirm their own ideas, some kind of confirmation bias, and they ignore other studies. And they say, oh, I find 10 studies that support my view, and the colleague says, I find 10 studies that are against your argument. And you should avoid this problem in meta-analysis, and therefore following a strict procedure. You have, for example, document which databases did you use for searching the references and the literature. You have to document which search terms, because if you change your search, you get different results. And of course, when did you make it? Date is very important, because additional studies come up, and after your date, for example, and then the reviewers or other people will say, why didn't you include the study? And then you can show it was, the search was done in February and the study was added in May, so I could not find it. And then you have to calculate effect sizes, which is sometimes very difficult. There are some very convenient programs like MetaWin is very simple, But some studies do not report effect sizes, they do not report means or standard deviations or some of this statistical stuff. And this is a big problem. And in psychology, for example, medicine, the reporting of effect sizes is more developed than in educational sciences. There is a difference. Studies that report the effect sizes very good, and there are some studies that do not do it. So I think we should move forward the next 5 or 10 years in more properly reporting our effect sizes of the studies. Then you have to decide which are the criteria for inclusion of the study. This is also difficult. I myself would include most of the studies. Because if you exclude a lot of studies, the people say, he has excluded all the studies that are against him. And then we just look only those exclusion criteria. For example, if you want to focus on adolescents at school, you can exclude university students. But this is a clear exclusion criteria. So this is okay and no one will criticize it. And we made an application about that, and we just made this meta-analysis and then extracted all the problems of the previous studies and tried to overcome these problems in a follow-up treatment control study. Here you see the output of such a meta-analysis. You see the treatment control effect size. The effect size is right here on the axis, and every study gets a mean and the variance. And we have looked at studies with a post-test after teaching and studies with follow-up test after 6 weeks. And you see that the variance should not move into 0 or negative parts, only positive parts, then we have a positive general effect size. And we see on the top, it's called grand mean. This is the mean effect size above all studies. And you see it's 1.4. This is a very high effect size for such a study. But it's a treatment control study. We looked at studies that did living animal teaching, and the control group did nothing. So it's not very fascinating that pupils that have been taught about the topic, that they learn more than pupils that have taught about nothing. And the treatment control design shows there is a sustainable effect. The second, we looked at differences between alternatives, living animals and other animals, video or other demonstrations, skeletons. We checked all the studies, and here you see the grand mean is at 0.2. So the grand mean, the effect size of all studies is very small. And you see that a lot of studies are on the negative side. So we have studies that show living animals is better, and we have studies that show living animals are worse than conventional teaching. And this led to a further analysis, and we checked out which are the limitations of all these previous studies. And this is a very interesting aspect because we found out that a lot of educational studies, especially in the 1980s, did not apply a control group. They just tested pupils, made a treatment, tested again, and said they increased their knowledge. But this is not true. We've seen it in psychology, we have retest effects. If you apply the same test about knowledge 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, the knowledge will get up. You don't know why, it's the retest effect. So just simply testing improves your test scores. It's the same when you do intelligence tests. If you do the first intelligence test, you get a good performance. If you do it again and again and again, better and better. So if you test intelligence on an individual basis, you must change the tests. You cannot apply the same test again because you will become more and more intelligent by testing. Then we looked at sample sizes. Of course, large sample sizes in educational studies, when you do treatment group, control group designs, a sample size about 200, 400 is very good. Only one class against another class is a lower sample size. And of course, we need the pre-test because you must assess what are the differences between your groups before the study. Another aspect, one of the most famous German studies that has been cited 50 years is that it was a laboratory study. It was just carried out in a lab, so not in a real field setting. And we are educators, we want to test our students in a field setting. Further, they checked only one animal species, and we have a big statistical problem because the data sets are not independent. This is a bit sophisticated problem, but when you're familiar with this problem, you see that one class has 20 or 30 or 40 pupils, and these 40 pupils cannot be treated as statistically independent data points. We did this until 10 years ago. All did this usually, but there are new techniques now to accomplish this problem by linear models or something like this, where you can control for this, that it's put into another, that it's put together in one class, because you have variance in the data on the class level, and you have to extract this variance. And this has been done only 5 or 10 years since these programs have been made easy. And we did some different animals that I think you're familiar with to overcome the problem that it's only one animal. If you use always the mouse, it's easier because the pupils find the mouse more cute than the snail, and but this does not provide a good effect if you use only one kind of animal. And we have some kind of treatment. We had living animals in one part of the groups, and we had the same in some kind of film. Videos especially made for this treatment and to show that the teaching was identical. This slide, you see the overview over our study design. It was very complicated. We had 3 groups. We had at the bottom a simple control group. The control group did receive no teaching about living animals. And we have the 2 treatment groups. The red one is about the living animal, and the other one is about the video teaching. And we had pre-test at the beginning, and after all lessons, we tested the knowledge, and we made a follow-up test 6 weeks later, and another one half a year later. And in the control group, we combined the follow-up tests because it's not the post-tests. Sorry, because it's not possible to have a control group. Every hour you give them a test, and they ask you to talk about this topic, and 1 hour later again and again. So we have to combine it to have one test. And you see another overview. We have these treatments, originals, no intervention, and we had 180 pupils in every treatment and 100 pupils in the control group. So it was a large study about that. And in the very first comparison, we put both treatments together and looked, are the treatments better than the control group? And the statistics is scored on 0, so 0 is the mean, and you see the treatments are better than the control group. So teaching about living animals is more effective than not teaching about living animals. But this is something that's not that spectacular. The next one, We checked all the 3 different animals in their significances, and we used this kind of linear model where we made the class, the special class, as grouping variable, and it was a bit frustrating because you find some well-known effects, of course. You find gender effects. That is, girls score better than boys. I think, I don't know the situation in Turkey, but in Germany it's usual that in nearly all subjects girls score higher than boys. And we found the school type effect. We have different types of schools. It's very difficult to explain because we have 16 different federal states. Every federal state has a different school system. And within every federal state, we have 4 or 5 different school types. So it's incredible. But we find a school type effect that is when you are on a higher ranking school. It's called gymnasium, which is the highest gifted pupils. They score better than the lower gifted pupils. We found no effect on treatment. Absolutely no effect. But of course, we found an influence of the pretest. Pupils with a high pretest knowledge perform better, and I think this is also known since the 60s. Oswald wrote that the most important thing for learning research is what the learner already knows. He knows a lot, and then he can learn more. And we use the grades in science education, and this had also an important effect. And this is, on the one kind, frustrating, but on the other one, it fully supports all the discussions about HETI, because we see pretest and grade are the differential factors that are in the pupil himself or herself. So what the pupils have as their when they go to school, this is the most important fact of learning, and the treatment was only very slightly, but not significantly influencing it. And the next problem is that the treatment effects get visible when you use old statistical techniques. If you use not the randomization models, if you just use old t-tests, then you get higher values. But this points on the one hand to the statistical question, but also to the grouping variable. The class is grouped together, and the most responsible person in the class is, of course, pupils are always responsible, but is the teacher. So we might assume that the teacher has another important effect. And we checked out emotions for self-determination following on DC and Ryan, interest, competence, autonomy, pressure tension, and you see on the asterisks, there are only in the mouse treatment differences between the animals and films. This is also a very important result. Living mice produce higher emotions. This might be one reason why a lot of researchers always use mammals, like mice or others, to get a better effect. If you use those ugly animals, like snail, you get no effects. So it might also depend on the animal. We did another treatment control study, and then I will move to some of the differential factors. You know that pupils and adults, of course, are afraid because of some animals, or they are disgusting, they don't like them, and it is assumed that we should reduce disgust and anxiety for different animals to get a better understanding of education, ecological, environmental aspects. But of course, you always must keep in mind disgust and anxiety and fear are basic biological components that helped us in the last 200,000 years to survive. It's better to run away when there's a spider rather than go and take him on the hand and look if it's poisoning you. So it's normal behavior. But in Central Europe, there are no poisonous animals. Some snakes, but very, very seldom. And we looked also at living animals, made some treatments, again the same treatments, and the control group and measured, discussed before the teaching started and discussed at the end. You see here the living animal treatments and the control group, and you see discussed prior to the teaching and discussed after the teaching. You see that discussed gets lower in the living animal treatments and also gets lower in the control group, but the differences are not significant for the discussed ratings in the control group. This is very important because you also see some kind of retest effect. You get changes in the test scores without any intervention, without any treatment. So you always have to do the control group to check out for this retesting. We then, after having reduced discussed, this was one of the more important studies, we checked out also the well-known fact of outdoor teaching. This is a very important aspect in environmental education, to teach outside, to let pupils come in contact with animals. And we tested it in primary school pupils age of 9 or 10 years. And the topic was amphibian conservation. And we made some classroom teaching. This is also important when you move to outdoor teaching. You can't just get outside. You have to prepare the children, you have to prepare the cognitive materials, then go outside, and after the teaching, outside you have to come back into the classroom and again do some teaching about that. And this is one of the German problems, I think. They like going outside, but they don't like preparing it. They like going to the zoo, but it's not really good prepared. And then we had a problem. Primary school pupils at the age of 9 or 10 years are always motivated. So when you need a control group that is not allowed going outside, they will cry, they will be depressed. Yeah. And we had no solution for this standardized protocol. But we had a lot of luck because amphibians are not programmable. So they migrate in the spring at a given temperature, at a humidity, and you cannot perfectly predict it. You can say, it's March, it should start, but you cannot perfectly predict it. And then the amphibians started migrating when there were holidays. And our luck was half of our students were on holiday and could not participate in this action. And the other ones were invited to join us in the outdoor teaching. This was good because this was some kind of separating of the group without any tears and any problems by the students, just by the holidays randomized. The amphibians were very intelligent doing this. And we have compared after we made a pretest and used pretest as covariate. It's not shown here. And you see that classroom teaching and outdoor teaching has a large difference, very large difference in statistical terms. That is, the outdoor teaching with the amphibians was very effective. And then you see a very interesting phenomenon. We made the post-test, test at the first day at school. When the holiday children arrived, first made the post-test, test, and then we allowed the pupils to talk about their experience outside. And the pupils that have been outside in the outdoor teaching told the other pupils about their experience. And then in the action test, some weeks later, you see the outdoor group has a high level, but the other group has increased their knowledge, and probably because they have been taught by the other people. The peer tutoring process. So it's very effective. The solution for crowded classrooms, also to send half of the class somewhere else, and in the next term the other half of the class somewhere else. They come back and talk about their experience, teach themselves, and this could be possible to increase the knowledge. We also checked the emotions again, also on a Likert scale from 1 to 5. the interest is extremely high, well-being is extremely high, anxiety, boredom, and pride is very low, and they give good grading. Grading hostility very low, and we found no differences between both teaching methods. And this is some kind of experience we cannot explain, because I assume encountering living animals should be better, more interesting. But the other question could be that the classroom teaching was already so interesting for the pupils that they give these high scores. We then moved to test this effect again, because you know it's not enough to do one study, you must do replication studies on other topics, on other subjects, and we wanted to test this peer tutoring effect in German Zoo. It was a very small zoo in Bernburg. I think nobody will know it, but this was a very open zoo. They wanted to have the results and were interested in our research, and we made some designs, some teaching about mammals, birds, reptiles, and we made 4 different groups. And a zoo guide. Zoo guide is teacher-centered. They told about the animals. The children listen, can ask questions, write down their notices, and we had group-based working that is separating pupils into groups of 3 to 4 persons. This is the optimal group size. There's a study about that. And we had 2 group-based teaching. One was teacher-centered at the end. The groups came back to the teacher, and the teacher was organizing the discussion. And we had the group-based peer tutoring, where the peers told themselves about their experience. And of course, again, a control group to avoid that the statistical effects are only by retesting. The control group visited the zoo, but got no explanation. They did what they wanted to do. 800 pupils in the study of Barbara Kummer. And here you see the overview again. We had the pre-test, then the unstructured zoo visit without any teaching, the zoo guide, second, peer-based, teacher-centered summary, and peer-based and peer tutoring summary. We checked at the last 2 a group test just to see if they had learned anything. For example, if you assume that there are groups at the zoo, they walk through the zoo on their own, and you must to check if they did learn at all, or if they went to the playground also. This was important in the group test. And then we made a post-test, and 6 weeks later, again, some kind of retention. First, as always, we controlled the simple control group without any teaching episode with the 3 different treatment groups, and you find good effects, good differences between the control group and the treatment. So pupils will learn something at the zoo, but not about the topic. They will learn about the topic only when you teach them. Then we find some different effects in the treatment group. We have here separated again the group-based, teacher-centered, group-based, and the docent led the zoo guide too. As previously, the mean is standardized at the 0 value. And you see in the post-test, the best group in the post-test is teacher-centered, which is against expectations, but probably, of course, a good teacher-centered teaching can be more effective than group-based learning. But fortunately, in the retention test 6 weeks later, the group-based teaching scores higher than the teacher-centered teaching. So in the long run, you see, again, some more sustainable knowledge in the teacher-centered aspects. But this is also given some cautionary note. If you test only after the intervention, you get different results. And if you test only after 6 weeks, you will also have different results. So it's optimal testing 2 times after the intervention. So you can look, are there differences after 6 weeks, which is a more sustainable knowledge, or are there differences after a few days or a few hours? And of course, at best, you could test them after 1 year, but it's almost impossible to get the classes back again. And at least in Germany, you need a coding. You cannot use their names on the test. It's not allowed because of anonymity. So you need a coding. And after 1 year, the pupils cannot remember their coding. They use some very difficult coding with the name of the mother, the first letter of their hometown, and very, very difficult coding, but sometimes they cannot remember 1 year later. Even our students at university sometimes have different codes within 4 weeks, which is impossible. Sometimes cannot put the data together because 2 or 3 people were impossible to remember their codes. We also looked at the emotions, interest, well-being, boredom, and it's again Likert scale. So 5 is a high value, interest was around 4, well-being also around 4, shows good well-being, high interest. Boredom was around the value 2, it's low boredom. Interestingly, difficulty was rated very high. So perhaps the teaching was too difficult. And we asked them if they would recommend the Zoom visit to their friends. And low scoring is a good scoring. So when they recommend it to their friends, this means that they found it good, they assessed it as good, and they gave grades around 2, which is good, and translated by good. What's the difference? The pupils were older compared to the beginners. So the older the pupils get, the worse they grade the teaching. If you ask in the 10th grade about the grade of the teaching, it will go worse down. So they are so critical, perhaps, when they become older. And in the primary school, they're always happy about everything. You make something interesting, they are happy. And we have, this is the last study which I want to present. We then repeated the same study in Heidelberg. The Heidelberg student is always happy for such collaborations because they are very open people, and it was also a PhD project of Brigitte Seibold, and she assessed primates. The student in Heidelberg has 3 primates, orangutan, chimps, and gorilla. It's too easy. They are different subspecies of gorilla, but I don't know them all. And we checked out, is the out-of-school setting better than teaching at school? And she developed a 2-by-2 design where we combined, for example, visit with the school teaching. So on the right-hand side below, there are pupils, they visited the zoo, and after the zoo, they got an additional school teacher. The left side open, they had no zoo visit and no school teaching, and so you see it's crossed the design, and we wanted to check out, is the zoo visit better than teaching at school, and is the additional teaching some kind of add-on, does it improve the teaching? And here we see the most interesting part. We tested again prior knowledge, post-test, and 2 retention tests, 1 after 6 weeks, 1 after half a year, and to see no difference between teaching in the zoo and teaching in the zoo plus teaching at school. So the additional teaching at the school did not improve the knowledge scores. But, which was the most important aspect, the teaching at the zoo was always better than teaching only at school. This was one of the largest zoo studies. About 1,000 pupils participated in this study, and we were able to show that teaching at the zoo is effective compared to only teaching at the school. And this was a good message also for the zoo, because the zoo was happy about that. And they have a zoo school, and the zoo school is starting to optimize their programs because of the results of the visit. And then we checked these emotional, situational emotions, and it's very interesting when you start with interest. You see the median in the box plot of interest is similar, only if they were only taught at the school. No difference in interest. So the topic of primates might be very interesting for the girls, even if all exposed. And there are also no differences in well-being, and the boredom was a bit higher. Boredom is below, was higher in the combined program, which might be a result. They have learned about the primates at the zoo, and again they learn about the primates at school, so they have 2 times primates, so they say it's okay now. Good. I am happy that you listened to me, and I would like to thank you for being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for your participation and attention. Now we'll have a lunch break, and lunch will be held in the main cafeteria. You might have some trouble finding it, therefore we'll be meeting in front of the building, and then we'll go together for lunch. Thank you very much.